Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I've been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars every single day for On SI since August 2019. And we are continuing to march forward through another offseason together. As always, you can find our 24/7, 100% free boots on the ground coverage of the Jacksonville Jaguars every single day on social media, such as Facebook and Twitter, when you follow us at Jaguars on SI. You can also find us at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. All right, folks, welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. Today, we are breaking down our thoughts from OTA number 7. It was the third OTA that we've seen so far out of the 7. And it was a little bit different of a practice on Monday at the Miller Electric Center because it was held much earlier in the day. I'd say the first couple practices were around noon. This one started closer to 9. Just as a media person covering it, it doesn't obviously matter. What matters is what's best, for the athletes, the coaches, the staff, etc. But as somebody who's there working, I greatly enjoy morning practices more. Something about football in the morning, to me, just goes right. So it was an interesting practice for the Jaguars at OTAs. Again, OTAs, it's 100% voluntary. There were a few guys, obviously, who weren't there. I don't ever really talk about guys being absent from voluntary practices. To me, it's just not something worth talking about. They don't have to be there. There are some cases where the story kind of becomes bigger than the topic, like when Josh Hines-Allen didn't go to OTAs, and I think it was 2023. Goes on to have a 17.5 sack season, best pass rush season by any Jaguar ever. It is actually on the topic of Josh Hines-Allen that I wanted to touch on first. He spoke to the media after practice. He noted how it was important to him to come to OTAs. He had already decided, I believe he said last year, that he'd be at OTAs this year. But regardless, it was important to him to be at OTAs this year, with Liam Cohen. In the past few off seasons during OTAs times, he's been working on his own in Arizona. And 25, I think, sacks over the last 2 years, 17.5 sacks, like I said, in 2023, when so many people tried to make it seem like he wasn't going to OTAs because it was a contract thing. It wasn't. He was, improving himself, through his own means, doing so, in Arizona, as we've said. And it was for, Josh, to me, to be at OTAs this week, I think says a lot, one, about his leadership, and two, what they're kind of creating, inside the building in Jacksonville so far. But obviously outside of that, the most important thing that he talked about was, and it's kind of been a hot button topic, I'd say, probably at least the last 2 weeks, etc. But, it was on his playing weight in 2024. Now, we've talked about it before. Anybody who watched the Jaguars last year, knows that across the board defensively, they played at a bigger size last year. Devin Lloyd was noticeably bigger. Andre Cisco was. Trayvon Walker was. He said he's only down 3 pounds, but he looks noticeably, to me, not as bulky as he was last season. And then the biggest example was Josh. Josh said today that he was playing at 285 last year. He was 15 pounds south of 300 pounds. And to me, and he said how, he was wanting to be as dominant as possible. Obviously, Josh Hines-Allen is one of the best team guys I've ever covered, in my 6 years at the Jaguars. He's going to do whatever, the team wants because it's what's best in his mind, if it's best for the team. at least, from what I've seen covering him, then it's best for him. A lot of guys are like that. Eric Armstead, mentioned that with his defensive end switch. I think even, Trayvon Walker, etc. A lot of guys, the team is the biggest thing. But he noted that he won't be playing at that size again. It was too heavy for him. Trayvon also noted when he was talking about him playing at that extra weight last year that it kind of wore on him by the end of the year, and Josh noted that. But to me, simply going and taking a guy who gets 17 and a half sacks and asking him to play at a weight that is clearly significantly higher than any weight he's ever played at before, it is just one of the most curious things I've seen the Jaguars do. I've seen any NFL organization do. And it's clear now that, with a new regime and a new fresh set of eyes on things, that the Jaguars are saying, okay, no, don't do this. You guys played much better at a different size. I think Josh Allen, probably an example of it. He still had a really good year last year is the thing. I know 7.5 sacks, I believe, but still really good pressure rates. Still had a really good year. He's a really, really good player. One of the best pass rushers in the NFL. Otherwise, things I saw at OTAs on Monday, I think that, obviously it was a lot of red zone action between the offense and defense. I thought Trevor Lawrence had a really sharp day, guys. One of the sharper practice days I've seen from him in some time. And he's always been a guy, and I've said this before, that I feel like sometimes is just much more of a gamer than he is in practice. Because, everybody does it. He will try things in practice he probably won't try in a game. Some things he will try in a game. But regardless, he's just always been more of a gamer to me. I thought specifically in the red zone period, and again, it's, you're limited in terms of what you can do. You're not wearing shoulder pads. You're wearing helmets and shorts. There's NFL rules on contact, all that kinds of stuff. I thought he shredded the defense in the red zone on Monday. I didn't have him down for an incomplete pass. Probably, I'd say around 8 attempts. He did have 2 plays where I thought he would have got sacked on. So 8 for 8, 2 sacks. But he threw several touchdowns. One to Brian Thomas Jr., one to Travis Hunter, one to Brendan Strange. He was putting the ball in good locations. He wasn't putting the ball in danger. And if they can, have him tap into consistency in the red zone, that will make all the difference in the fall. Now, obviously, this is one practice, in June. It doesn't mean all that much. But just in terms of what I saw, I thought Trevor had a impressive practice. In team drills as well, made some nice plays. A really good throw to Brian Thomas Jr. on the right sidelines between 2 defensive backs. Travis Hunter made a nice gain, over the middle. De'Ami Brown continues to impress. It was it wasn't like one side of the ball was clearly better than the other, I'd say, for the entirety of the practice. The first OTA practice, defense destroyed the offense. Second OTA practice, offense pretty clearly looked like the better unit. This one, I'd say very even. And Liam Cohen said similar after practice. And you just saw people on both sides of the ball making plays. I mentioned Strange. I mentioned the 3 receivers. Johnny Munt made a nice catch. Austin Trammell seemed to catch like a dozen passes. And defensively, guys made plays. Monteric Brown made a really nice pass breakup in team drills. He might be my favorite in terms of not my favorite option, because I obviously don't have one, but who I would say is the potential favorite to be the number 2 corner. He's had a really impressive offseason. It's a scheme that fits him. But, overall, it was a competitive, again, spirited practice. Really went back and forth in a lot of places. And like I said, it's OTAs. There's only so much you can take away from it. There's only so much they can really do. But it was at least a different type of practice compared to the first couple that we've seen. And, of course, the person who everybody is interested in every time the Jaguars would take the field for the, foreseeable future, Travis Hunter, to me, I feel like, he's had 4 practices now. I feel like for the 3rd practice in a row, I've said he's had his best practice yet, because it's true this time again. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all other podcast platforms at Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. And please also go find us on YouTube at Sports Videos on SI.